Hello all! Hello. How is everybody doing today? It's your boy, Rezi Reviews here with another Rezi Reviews. And today, our topic today, like I said, I decided to get a bit away from, the sort of heavy music we've been covering the past few streams and focus on something a little more funky, if you will, I guess. I wanted to, I very much love funk and R&B and soul and all that sort of music, and I wanted to explore, like, an artist in those sort of genres. I was sort of torn, like I said, between, what we're covering today and Funkadelic. I'm sure Funkadelic and Parliament are going to get their due time. Hi, Owie, how's it going, man? Yeah, Funkadelic and Parliament definitely going to get their due time on this show, but today we are covering Sly and the Family Stone, and a bit of Sly Stone's solo discography too. But yes, Sly and the Family Stone, some of the one of the most influential bands, if you will, of funk music. In the development of funk music, I should say. They weren't always funk, but we're gonna get into that. But you guys might be wondering, who is Sly and the Family Stone? Well, to get to the heart of that question, we really have to go back again to their origins, and kind of like Pantera, oddly enough, though that goes back to a musical family in Texas. Granted, different race. It was an African, like a middle-class African-American family called the Stewarts. Good, just been chilling. Oh, that's cool to hear. Glad to hear that, man. It was this family called the Stewarts. They were black, and they were middle class, and they were deeply religious. They belonged to the Church of God in Christ, which encouraged musical expression as a sign of religious devotion. Casey and Alpha Stewart would eventually move in the 1940s to California with their 4 children, Sylvester, Freddie, Rose, and Loretta, who they nurtured musically from a young age. Sylvester was especially taken with music. He became something of like a musical, multi-instrumental prodigy early on. He would play in like a number of bands in high school, including I think like a multiracial doo-wop group or something like that, with like another Filipino guy and like 2 other white dudes. What else? Oh yeah, he also became like a pretty popular DJ in the San Francisco area. Like he broadcast on the station KSOL, and he sort of rebranded it as K-Soul, fitting with like soul music. He played a lot of soul and R&B, and even like some of the popular rock artists of the day, like the Beatles and the Stones and what have you. And he also was like a small-time record producer too for the indie label Autumn Records. They were based in San Francisco and did like a lot of stuff for like local bands. Seriously, the dude, it's impressive. He was already rubbing shoulders with musical bigwigs in the Bay Area before he was even of legal age to drink. Eventually, though, he was still making music. He was playing in bands and whatnot. But in 1966, he made the decision with his brother Freddie, who had taken up the guitar in the interim. They had made the decision together to merge the 2 bands that they'd been playing in. You see, Sly was then playing with Cynthia Robinson, this black female trumpet player, which in the 1960s was still it was something of a rarity. While Freddie, he was playing with 2 white dudes. He was playing with drummer Greg Errico and saxophonist Jerry Martini. Needless to say, the decision to merge their bands, given who they were, was pretty radical for 1966. And they knew it, but they got along pretty well, and they all had great chemistry. They took to calling themselves Sly and the Family Stone, and Sly and his brother adopted the last name Stone. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the nickname Sly, that's a nickname, you know, Sylvester, he sort of had that misspelled a lot in high school, so he kind of was called that by friends, and, you know, it stuck for the rest of his life. So yeah, they were now Sly Stone, Freddie Stone, and, you know, soon after that, you know, they played their first gig, and then they hired bassist Larry Graham to round out the lineup. What else? Okay, one second. Let me take a sip of water here. So people, they took notice of Sly and the Family Stone right away. You know, this wild interracial band that, you know, played with a mixture of like rock and funk. Well, not funk, rock and soul. You know, Sly's sister, Vieta, who's a younger sister, by the way, born after I think the family moved to California. She was in her own vocal group in high school at the time with some friends in high school. And right away, she wanted to join her brother, and her group was brought on as backing vocalists to the band. They were called Little Sister, sort of as a supplement to like the group's, you know, full band ensemble. This entire collective was soon signed by Epic Records and went into the studio to record their debut. The result was the fittingly titled A Whole New Thing, which was released in the June of It was released in June of 1967. Fun fact about this album, unlike future albums where the band would prefer to do things with overdubs, this one was all recorded live. And, you know, while I do love what they can do with the overdubs in the future releases, there's just no denying that this album's live sound works in its favor, especially with tracks like Turn Me Loose and Bad Risk, which are loaded with like powerful horn lines and over-the-top driving rock beats. Yeah, indeed, this is a very, very prototypical version of funk. It takes jazz instruments and puts them over the beats of R&B and rock, and Sly Stone, when he's in full swing vocally, he's also just very exciting. He's like screeching and hollering. It's very electrifying on Turn Me Loose. And on more soulful tracks, like the very slow jam, Let Me Hear It From You, it gives you chills, man. It's nice. There are also some other pretty good tracks on the album. Underdog, If This Room Could Talk, Advice, and the closing track, Dog. The only thing is, some of these feel, I mean, I don't know, a little undercooked, a little less wild. Like, Underdog has a tremendously funky beat for 1967 in its verses, but it also quotes Frere Jacques in its opening and closing horn lines, and it's got this simple chorus without any beat to speak of. Other tracks, like If This Room Could Talk and Advice, feel like funk and soul if you heard them at a teenage sock hop or something. Not bad music at all, with some killer horn licks, especially like Advice, like that's incredible. I love that. But it feels a bit too clean cut, which is funny considering that the band were already sort of positioning themselves in their lyrics as a countercultural force against straight-laced American society in songs like Run, Run, Run. And speaking of Run, 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 other tracks on this album still, well, I mean, it was 1967 and people were getting really weird with their albums. Need I remind y'all, this was the year we saw things like the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper, The Doors' Self-Titled, and Pink Floyd's Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Some of the tracks on this album follow in the example of things like Piper, honestly, and their use of weird, goofy sound effects, and they kind of ruin the vibe of some of the songs. Particular offenders in my eyes are Run, 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 and the odd Trip to Your Heart. That song, that sounds like it sounds really silly towards the end. It kind of sounds like Sly Stone saw You know that film Fantastic Voyage where, everybody's like shrunk down and they're traveling inside like the body of somebody? He saw it like the year it came out, like year before or whatever, and he wanted to make a song as weird as that film. It's like that. I know it's a bit of an odd thing to complain about, right after talking about how this album feels very straight-laced in parts, but, I guess that's that juxtaposition which makes this album's situation quite obvious. It tries to be psychedelic and, like, sort of funky Motown at the same time, but the two sides don't really coexist so cleanly. Ultimately, this album, it does show a lot of promise for the young multiracial group. They clearly had a talent and a fire even so early into their career, but it just feels like they couldn't quite nail that balance between Motown-like R&B reprieves and experimental psychedelia just yet. A whole new thing. It's a pretty good intro to this band, I think. But compared to where they take their group chemistry and sound later, I'd say it comes off as premature in places. This is the album here, by the way. A big Sly on the front with his small bandmates. I'm gonna give this album here a B. So, let's see. So after that, after a new thing was released, it was a critical success. A lot of the critics and the papers loved it, but it didn't really catch on for whatever reason commercially. So CBS record executive Clive Davis would come to Sly with a request for a more commercial sound for the band. Now, of course, these guys being young flower children who generally thumb their nose at authority bossing them around, they were less than enthused to oblige, but Sly did start thinking up ideas for a more commercial approach to the band's funkadelic, if you will, sound. 67 was a wild year for music. Oh, definitely, man. I can't wait to explore more like bands that were active in the 60s. That's gonna be it's gonna be a trip to go through every time. But despite, kind of being pressured by the record label at this time, not all was, so morose for the band. They gained another member in the form of Rose, Sly's older sister, who quit her job around that time as a record shop employee to sing and play keys in the band. Renewed with this addition and Sly's new, more commercial approach, the band entered the studio again and recorded their second album, Dance to the Music, which released in April of 1968. Though the band... Oh, one second, I should probably show this. This is the album here, nice group shot of the new band, Rose included. So, this album, though the band may not have liked streamlining their sound too much, holy hell, did it make a difference. So many of the songs on Dance to the Music kick in a way that the previous album couldn't really reach. The title track is, of course, the standout classic everybody knows, Dance to the Music. It's what this album is best known for, and for good reason. The way the band is hailed in the intro by Cynthia Robbins' yells, "Get up and dance to the music," and all that. Sorry for ruining your ears there. The a cappella bits, the way the band gradually builds from the drums on up, Sly Stone's electrifying shrieks. There are just so many memorable, enlivening moments that make you want to, get up and dance. And I think even the band knew they had something golden here, because there's literally 3 other songs on this album sharing a similar structure to Dance to the Music in the form of the 12-minute long Dance to the Medley, which is a thrilling journey complete with some great guitar work and ambiance from Freddie Stone. I Ain't Got Nobody for Real, Don't Burn Baby, and Ride the Rhythm are 3 other fast-paced, energetic bangers presented elsewhere on the album. Unfortunately, I'm not as much a fan of the former as the others. It just kind of feels a bit repetitive with that central organ riff. I don't know. Rose Stone, for her debut with the band, she sounds great on this album. Sly, Freddie, and Larry Graham, they all have great voices, but don't get me wrong, but having that belty female texture on top of these energetic tracks just moves the needle that much further. It's, the band already sort of knew this. They already had Cynthia Robinson doing her sort of interjectory yells and whatnot as early as a whole new thing. But it's great hearing Rose trade off these wild belty vocals with her brothers on the album. It's like the band was bouncing off of one another in the studio. You can hear the energy. The mid-tempo tunes on this album were also pretty incredible, and they show a greater evolution towards what we understand today as funk. I'm thinking in particular of the anthemic Are You Ready, which has this sublime rhythm section interplay between Larry Graham's staccato bass and Greg Errico's groovy drumming, and of course an absolutely transcendent recurring horn part. Color Me True is also great, featuring some sexy blues guitar licks from Freddie Stone, and some low-key conscious lyrics discussing the differences of the white and black experience in America. Higher, of course, is a song about take a damn guess. It's really funky with a great chorus, and it's got some of the only harmonica playing on the album, which is a great accompaniment to the track. Sly Stone is a pretty good harmonica player. He's kind of inspirational, I guess. If there's any low point on the album, though, it'd honestly be the album's final track, I'll Never Love Again. It's this ballad sung by Larry Graham, and his vocals are great, and the band delivers a decent performance, but this is sequenced right after, the superb energy of Are You Ready and Don't Burn Baby, and compared to those songs, this one is just, it's kind of a weak way to close off the album, if you ask me, especially since it ends on a fade out. Why did they choose to close the album off with this when they could have ended it with a bang with Don't Burn Baby or something? Overall though, Dance to the Music, I think it's a definite improvement over its predecessor, and it shows the band truly nailing that balance between soul and psychedelia. It's not a perfect album. There are a few weaker moments here and there, but Sly and the rest of the gang were just overall a lot more bold and confident with their evolving sound, and you can hear it in the sheer energy pouring from these songs. I'm going to give this album an A. Or put it in the A tier, rather. So, next up, Dance to the Music. The song Dance to the Music was a hit for the band. It peaked at number 8 on the American charts. And it actually kind of kicked off a new wave in black R&B music. Motown artists, doo-wop groups, the guys in suits, what have you. Bands like the Temptations and the Four Tops, they changed their sound to be more in line with the sort of psychedelic soul blend Sly and his family Stone established with Dance to the Music. Unfortunately for the band, that single success, that impact, didn't exactly translate to album sales. Nevertheless, the band continued on, they played live gigs, and they went into the studio while the iron was still hot to record a follow-up. Their third album, Life, would release only 5 months later in September of 1968. So this album, I guess you could say Life is strange. Ayo, bun drop, I guess, but I mean that. It's clear to me with this album they were trying to follow up their taste of commercial success from that same year with more songs in the vein of songs from Dance to the Music, but maybe a little more wiggle room for experimentation and having fun. But what we get, it's a mixture of strong tracks, lacking tracks, and just utterly baffling ones. I guess to start with the more baffling tracks for it first, get that out of the way. Chicken literally has a musical motif built around an imitation of chicken noises. I'm an Animal is a boring track where the band repeat the title for most of it, interspersed with corny animal puns. And I mean, I guess that's not unheard of in funk music. Jungle Boogie did that a lot better in 1973, but I don't know. It's just not a really lively track to me. Life. It's this overly happy sounding song with some corny laughter overdubs inserted in the beginning and the end. It's kind of sounds like a sitcom introduction almost. I don't know, in the cheesiest way. And the closer, Jane is a groupie, has this really weird march-like beat which doesn't really fit with the song at all. I don't know, the band really leaned into psychedelic absurdity more on this album, and unfortunately it doesn't really work. Maybe back in 1968 these were more endearing listens, but they just come off as silly now. Then there are tracks on the album which are alright. The opener, Dynamite, is fun, but it ultimately sounds more like an outtake from Dance to the Music than the opener of its own album. Hell, there's even a part at the end where the band sort of mock dance to the music with its horn riffs and acapella vocals. Fun is alright, if a bit repetitive. It doesn't really go anywhere other than a key change towards the end of the song. The same is mostly true of Into My Own Thing, which is largely repetitive save for a stinger horn line. Now, I've got nothing wrong with repetitiveness when it comes to funk music. It's kind of crucial to the genre, as any casual listen to James Brown will tell you, but given that the rest of the album falls back on more conventional, Motown-like R&B sounds, these songs just kind of sound out of place here. I don't know. Speaking of those Motown sounds, though, let's actually talk about them, the stronger moments on this album. Harmony has an amazing chorus, cool guitar noodling from Rezi Stone, and this thrilling closing section with great trumpet and sax synergy. Plastic Jim is a fun song about plastic people, that is to say, in 1960s speak, non-hippies, which makes a clever direct musical callback to the Beatles' Eleanor Rigby. Love City is another song built on this incredible interplay between the bass and drums. It's almost like a slower, groovier dance to the music, complete with a neat scat singing break over top drums. And then we have the unfortunately named Milady, Tips Fedora. Sorry, Sly, I know incels as we know them didn't exist then, but even so, it's still funny, a song called Milady. It's another banger in the vein of Dance to the Music, and you could easily make the argument that it's derivative like Dynamite, but if not even more so. But honest to God, I love that sort of song structure so much that I'm willing to give this song a pass. You got more a cappella vocals, a chanted refrain, my lady, and like a driving rhythm section, even this neat recurring sax lick in the chorus. But it's a great tune, which was even better live. Like, holy hell, Sly and the Family Stone live in this time period, they were on fire every gig. But overall though, what to make of Life? Taken out of context, that is a pretty deep question, but in context, we're talking about this album here, pointing out the album art, and it is a pretty easy question to answer there. It's kind of a jumbled mess of an album that lacks a lot of the same fire and consistency that Dance to the Music really had. The band does still deliver some great performances here, and consequently some certified Family Stone classics, but a lot of these songs are just too goofy, strange, or boring for me to really dig them. Thankfully, it's not a painful album. It's relatively short, inoffensive listen at 30 minutes long. It's just not as inspired as the preceding work. I'm going to give it a C. Yeah. it's probably the weakest album released by the classic Sly and the Family Stone line. Spoiler alert there. But needless to say, Life wasn't much of a hit for the band either. It peaked at the bottom rungs of the American Top 200. I think it was like 195 or something like that. Still, the band pinned their hopes on getting better known abroad through live gigs until a planned British tour was cut short when Larry Graham was busted by British police for weed possession. Their plans ruined, the band returned home and began immediately planning a follow-up album. Like, you thought King Gizzard was a busy band, but bands back in the 60s, this was the regular work ethic, man. Just go into the studio, record, and, you know, hope it hits big. Play the few live gigs in the interim, and just go back and record. It's... it was crazy. But, you know, all the while they were planning this new album, they were reading the news. Scary things were happening in America the entire year they were trying to make it big. You know, in 1968, anti-Vietnam War protests reached a fever pitch over the Tet Offensive. The civil rights movement was getting deadlier still with the assassination of MLK driving activists into yet more militant desperation. And to make things even worse, Richard Nixon would go on to win the presidential election that November. Sly and the band felt that they needed to respond and immediately set to work making music that meant something. Music that resonated with the times. They released 2 singles over the next few months as they worked on the respective album, Everyday People and Stand. They actually scored their first #1 hit with the former. Eventually, though, the full product of their musical and intellectual labor would come to be known to the public. The album Stand, it would release in May of 1969. Give me 1 second. I'm going to turn on my lights real quick because it's getting kind of dark in my room. Okay. So, what's to say about Stand first? Well, what is obvious immediately is the passion. The lead-off track, the title track, Stand, it's an impassioned plea to the listener to stand up for yourself, for your rights, for the betterment of society, all while Sly and Rose are singing wildly in the choruses again. And the rhythm's alright at first. It's, you know, it's this groovy, mid-tempo jam that's very soul-like. But then the song snaps at the end to this wild gospel chant with shrill horns and what sounds like a proto-disco beat. Now, supposedly, the song had a different ending at first, but Sly played an early version of it one night at a San Francisco club, and the patrons thought it was just alright, so later on, soon after that, he hired a bunch of session musicians to come record this ending section, this gospel-sounding ending section, since the rest of the band were elsewhere at the time. I absolutely love it, though. It's such a great way to lead off the album. And the rest of Side A, it's equally as classic, you know. Don't Call Me N-Word, Whitey is a politically charged song examining the hostility between black people and white people in America at the time, with a simple refrain that I could never sing myself because I am an orange cat boy, I'm not black. But damn, this song is groovy. It's got these awesome lone sax tones paired with Freddie Stone's wah-wah guitar and a slow, hypnotic rhythm in the drums and bass. I Want to Take You Higher updates higher from Dance to Music with a similar psychedelic groove to the previous track, but you know, the band members are all taking the turns, singing their hearts out. Sly gets a few good harmonica moments, there are some great horn stings, and of course, who can forget boom, laka, 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 boom, laka, 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 brown, you know. You have a bit more of a paranoid track in Somebody's Watching You, but perhaps acknowledging a bit more of a dread setting in from 1968 and the approaching end of the 60s, the end of the hippie era, as it were. Though it's no less groovy, it's kind of got a sort of Latin shuffle in the background almost. And then the side closes with Sing a Simple Song, which absolutely slaps. It's got this great introduction by Cynthia Robinson and this absolute choice cut of a syncopated guitar riff on top of the tightest rhythm and horn section the band ever put to record to date, I should say. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is funk, though. This isn't just psychedelic soul. This is raw funk in its earliest form. And the lyrics are great, too. It celebrates music as a refuge from life's troubles, you know. A simple song will make it better for a little while. Everybody say now, Side B is also great on this album, but it's a bit uneven. Everyday People, absolute classic song with a chill, groovy cowbell-led rhythm, and it's this impassioned call for racial unity in its lyrics. The closer, You Can Make It If You Try, is great too. It features some optimistic lyrics delivered passionately by all the members of the band, and this stellar funk breakdown between Greg Errico and Freddie in the middle. However, both tracks, they're kind of sandwiched by this. They're not sandwiched by. They sandwich this lengthy 13-minute instrumental called Sex Machine. This is a blues-inspired jam with some great performances by Sly and harmonica. At least I think it's harmonica. The studio effects kind of make it hard to tell. And then there's Freddie and Greg. They really kill it. But it's essentially just a jam. It's a track you gotta be in the mood for. Otherwise, you might end up midway through and just saying fuck it and getting the idea and skipping to the next track. It is the sort of thing that sounds amazing on some catnip, though, let me tell you what. In all, though, stands. Let me show you the album cover here. Put that out. This one, very psychedelic, trippy cover with all the members of the band on the front. I love it. But in all, it's the band's boldest artistic move yet. Bringing to shape the future of black music to come in the process. Funk oozes out of some of these songs, and even those that aren't as explicitly funky are still just really well-written pop songs with incredible messages about standing up for yourself and coming together across racial boundaries, And the band delivers some of their tightest performances to date here. Seriously, Sly and Rose deliver some killer vocals. The horn section's always been on point, but everything they do on this album is absolute gold. And of course, I gotta shout out my fellow drummer boy, Greg Errico, such an underrated drummer. And this album shows his skill. I'm kind of torn on where to place this because of the sheer presence of Sex Machine. Seriously, the thing is like a third of the album's length, even if it's got some great performances. But I can't deny this album's place in music history. It was an important political message and a bold new step for psychedelic soul. And what would eventually become funk music, I'm going to give it an S. S for stand, if you will. Take another sip of water. But Stand, it broke the band into the limelight. In the following months, so many doors opened for the band gig-wise. They played at the Harlem Cultural Festival. Shout out to Questlove's Summer of Soul. Go see that documentary if you haven't already. It is amazing. Woodstock, Isle of Wight, etc., etc., etc. The band was playing to thousands of people in 1969 and making thousands and thousands of dollars in the process. They were also already working on a follow-up album to Stand. They released two singles for the rest of that year. Hot Fun in the Summertime and Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. I can't stress enough, go listen to those songs too. Those are essential Sly and Family Stone listening. Hot Fun in the Summertime is this nice little swung ballady type thing. Some great vocals from Rose and Sly. And Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again is just another great, like, early funk track. It's like where Larry Graham, he actually invented the slap bass, and he first used it on that song, fun fact. At least audibly. He claims to have used it on Everyday People, but he only, like, plays one note for the entire song. So, anyways, sorry for the tangent. Unfortunately, though, the band, they moved to Los Angeles in the fall of 1969, I'm sorry. As they tried to make further plans, they got into drugs. Hard drugs, like not just weed, but coke, PCP, the heavy shit. Sly especially, like he spent most of 1970 on drugs, and this began to seriously affect their live shows and like TV bookings. Like seriously, go on YouTube after this. Search in YouTube after this, like Sly 1970 interview or 1971 interview. And like you'll see footage of him on Dick Cavett, and he is just high out of his mind. There'd be several times that year in 1970 where Sly would just not show up to a gig or play poorly, and the crowds would riot or get angry and huffy as a result. I would know. My college, my alma mater, actually had Sly and the Family Stone come through in 1970 for a gig, but Sly didn't end up showing up, so the gig ended up getting canceled. I learned that digging through like old yearbooks at my college while I was still there. So funny little coincidence. But eventually, with all this drug stuff, all this toxicity and failure to be tight as a band, Greg Errico, he eventually had enough and was the first one to leave. He left sometime in early 1971. He would eventually be replaced by Jerry Gibson, which, if you've never heard of him before, don't worry, he's not that important in the grand scheme of things. All the while, the band slowly, agonizingly worked on the follow-up to Stand, or should I say, Sly worked on most of the follow-up himself in his personal studios, hopped up on drugs. He recorded most of his vocals with a wireless microphone while he was lying in bed, and he was experimenting a lot with this primitive drum machine technology of the time. He brought in the other members of the Family Stone for overdubs, of course, but this was nothing like the warmth and togetherness that defined their earlier recording processes. He even brought in studio musicians like Bobby Womack and Ike Turner for overdubs. Clearly, this was more Sly, less Family Stone this time. This will become a recurring theme. Anyway, eventually in fall of 1971, Sly delivered the tapes to Clive Davis, who is frantically stemming the demand for new Sly material in the meantime with the greatest hits compilation and reissues. Relieved, Davis would assemble the album for a November release. It was originally going to be called Africa Talks to You after one of its tracks, but I think Sly might have insisted it change in response to Marvin Gaye's then recent What's Going On. There's a Riot Going On, which was the final name of the album, finally came out in November of 1971, almost 2 years after the last new material that the band had put out. Right away, it's clear when you listen to it that the funk on There's a Riot Going On, which, before we get any further, this is its cover. It's a nice, striking version of the American flag with like black in place of blue and suns in place of stars. It's kind of striking, very, I don't know, dissonant almost. And it's clear from when you first start listening to this album. It's a different beast. It's a different funky beast than what's come before. Opening track, Love and Height, it's got this tight groove in the drums and the bass, which is wildly syncopated in the verses. All you have over top, little singers, like very haunting almost, backing vocals, Freddie's wah guitar, and Sly's raspy screeches, creating this dark, sedated mood. It's ecstasy at its peak, just before the crash, or at least that's what I imagine it's like. I've never personally had ecstasy. This song is groovy as hell, but there's definitely a dark underbelly to it, which I feel is a great indication of what's to come. And my god, right away, the rough production of this album jumps out. You know, despite how ambitious this album was, it's as lo-fi as it comes because of the amount of time Sly overdubbed the tapes. It creates this grainy sound, which I honestly think adds, honestly, to the album's funk charm. It's a very gritty sound. Though, Love and Height, that song along with You Caught Me Smiling and Space Cowboy, two other songs in the album, they're all songs with themes of being intoxicated out of your mind, which, I mean, I guess right about what you know, right? But there's also a general undercurrent of cynicism in the lyrics of this album. And I mean, hell, Love and Height, it's spelled H-A-I-G-H-T, spelled like it is in reference to Haight-Ashbury, which is this famous hippie neighborhood of San Francisco, which at that point in 1971 had fallen into disarray thanks to hard drug use running rampant in the area. Running Away is a deeply resigned song with the refrain, "Look at you fooling you." Now this by the same band that was just 2 years ago saying you can make it if you tried. There are also just more philosophical moments on songs like Time and Poet, and this great little ballad in Just Like a Baby. Hell, even the #1 song from this album, Family Affair, is a dark song musing on the wildly different lives of two people with presumably different lots in life. It's like, you know, at the end of the 60s, hippies were burnt out, Altamont happened, violence marred what, you know, Kent State happened, Nixon continued to push into Cambodia, the hopes that you could, if you fought hard enough, you could, I don't know, you could change things meaningfully. That illusion sort of broke down. You know, COINTELPRO sort of broke down the civil rights movement and infiltrated and killed a lot of, you know, black civil rights organizations before they really got off the ground. It was a very cynical time to be in, and Sly, he was just done playing optimist and activist. He was far too high off his mind and jaded to entertain that more cheery music that he'd written on Stand. That said, you know, the actual instrumentals of this album, top notch. By far, this is the cleanest funk the band had produced to date. Larry Graham is slapping and popping his bass all over the album, while drummers, either Greg Errico or his replacement or some other studio guy, deliver tight pockets alongside him on alongside Larry Graham, I should say, on tracks like Love and Height, Brave and Strong, and the closer, Thank You for Talking to Me, Africa, which is just a slowed down remake of Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, which is, it's just absolutely filthy in its groove. I love it so much. Even on more sedated tracks, though, like You Caught Me Smiling and Running Away, the grooves are just so tight. And of course, the horns continue to be as good as they've ever been, stinging right where they need to, and even providing a bit of atmosphere. You know, Cynthia Robinson's trumpet part on Running Away is oddly sad in that sort of wistful way. But as I said, you know, Sly was going nuts over drum machines, and that manifests in a number of tracks on this album. Family Affair is built on this drum machine part, actually. It's the first #1 single for that to be the case, and it is groovy as hell. It features a smooth electronic piano part from the fifth Beatle member, I guess you could say, fifth Beatle candidate, Billy Preston. There are some other neat drum machine beats scattered throughout the album. They underpin many of the slower tunes, such as Time, Poet, and Space Cowboy, and the funky as hell Africa Talks to You, the Asphalt Jungle. You know, it creates this creates this really unique atmosphere underneath the regular funk performances of Sly and his bandmates. Here, in spite of all the rust and scuff of the band and their drug-fueled haze, they were expanding upon their sonic palette even further, leaving behind their psychedelic soul sound for a more beat-focused, even mechanical funk, in a way. Overall, though, there's a Riot going on. It's a masterpiece in spite of its circumstances. Somehow, Sly Stone hopped up on drugs at almost all times throughout 1970 and 1971, delivered a brilliantly cynical funk album which confirmed that the band's more syncopated, rhythmic sound first heard on Stand would remain, even if the flowers and peace were left behind in the process. Some people love to cite Fleetwood Mac's Rumors as the classic album created under rough circumstances, given that the band was undergoing multiple divorces and budding cocaine addictions at the time. But that album doesn't literally crackle and hiss because Lindsey Buckingham made too many damn overdubs, I'll tell you that. This album, there's a riot going on. It's an incredible, sometimes emotional listen from front to back, and I can't recommend it enough. I'm going to give it an S. Fortunately for the band, the rest of the world was just as burnt out, as I said, and welcoming of Riot songs. Family Affair went straight to #1 in America, as well as the album, when it was released, and Runnin' Away would later be put out as a single and also broke the top 40. Sadly, the band was still in chaos, drug-fueled chaos. Larry Graham, scared for his life, left the band after the Black Panther-associated bodyguard Sly was surrounding himself with attacked Graham and his entourage under suspicion that he hired a hitman against Sly. Jerry Martini asked Sly about discrepancies in his share of the band's earnings, which then prompted a paranoid Sly to hire saxophonist Pat Rizzo as a replacement, except he never bothered kicking Jerry out of the band, so the band now just had 2 saxophonists in their horn section. After bringing on Rusty Allen on bass and Andy Newmark on drums, bye-bye Jerry Gibson, the band re-entered the studio in 1972 to keep on trucking. The resulting album from these sessions, Fresh, came out in June of 1973. And that one is this one right here. The one where Sly is just sort of jumping up in the air like, yeah, fresh and invigorated, and no doubt maybe a little on coke here. But let's see what this album has to offer, huh? Here on this album, on Fresh, we have a band as tight as before, but with a crisper production which really brings out the drums and the bass. Right from the start, this does spades for the album. In Time absolutely snaps, in spite of the fact that the drum beats and the bass parts and the verses they're hardly played straight. The horns and the background vocals enter with precision timing to complement Sly's thick vocals. It's an absolute groove of a song, and it was inspirational to no less than jazz legend Miles Davis. Reportedly, Davis had his band listen to this song in particular for 30 minutes in a row once in the 1970s during his whole jazz fusion era. And then this is followed up with If You Want Me to Stay, another classic Sly song which builds from this slow slink with drum machine to this quiet roar with the organ and like a loud vocal screech at the end. These two new songs right away, they show a band that was becoming confident as hell in its new sound, or at least good enough to mask up Sly's remaining drug issues. After the earlier slapdash effort with abandoning transition. The thing is, though, I kind of like the slapdash work a bit more. I mean, if you want to call There's a Riot Going On one of the most influential funk albums of all time, a slapdash effort, But after the first two songs on Fresh, the album just juts around between songs of various runtimes and grooves. In Time is almost 6 minutes long, and it's followed up by the 3 minutes of If You Want Me to Stay. Que Sera Sera is surrounded by songs around 2 minutes. I like a lot of the stuff on this album for the most part because of the variety. Let Me Have It All, it's got some fantastic interplay between bass, guitar, and drums, and great background singing. Frisbee is a very lanky number with some fun vocals from Sly and another great groove. Seriously, I can't stress how good Indy Newmark is on this album with Rusty Allen. They may not be Erico and Graham, but they hold down the fort nonetheless. I Don't Know, parentheses, Satisfaction, parentheses, is a funky little play on a classic Rolling Stones song with fitting background vocals and another thick-ass groove. The cover of there's a cover of Que Sera Sera, What Will Be, the classic Doris Day song of this album. And it's actually a very fantastic, soulful rendition, with Rose Stone taking point on the verses with a weary vocal before Sly yells his guts out on the choruses. If It Were Left Up to Me is this cute little song, almost like running away in its feel. I love how the background vocalists mostly dominate the song, except when Sly comes in at the end with his little cha-cha-cha. I actually wish it were a bit longer though, it's just below like 2 minutes long. Babies Making Babies is another good tune, though honestly it's not that good a closer. It's more funk like Let Me Have It All, which is fine, but well, it's the end. Shouldn't they be bringing the fire here? Also, this album does have a few weak points. The more drum machine dominant tracks this time, Thankful and Thoughtful and Keep On Dancing, they're nice if a little less interesting than on Riot. Drum machine is incorporated with drums excellently elsewhere on this album, but it's on tracks where the acoustic drums more clearly dominate with cool snare, ghost note grooves and whatnot, but I think the effect works best. Like, In Time is a perfect example of this. Also, Skin I Man is another song on this album. It's a fine tune, if a little short and a bit more straightforward, classic Sly than the other tracks on here. All in all, though, Fresh is a great continuation and maturation of the band's funk sound and development since Stand. It's not as memorable or impressionable as something like Stand or Riot, but it's still an incredible collection of groovy, funky songs. In spite of the fact that the band had entered a period of revolving lineups, the musical direction of Sly Stone was still competent enough to produce an album of tightly played, economically written, and well-produced funk music. I mean, shit, when you've got a great rhythm section and an expanded horn section, why would you waste the opportunity to make something like this great with them? I'm giving Fresh an A. Alright. Do I have any more water? Yep, I do, but it's a bit. Okay. Whew. We are, how long? Whew. We're just about midway through. Okay. Halfway point. Small Talk. Fresh was also a commercial success, along with If You Want Me to Stay. So the band were continuing to see momentum, but of course, at this time, Sly's drug addiction and erratic personality were still a wild card. He was continually spending extravagantly, dumping thousands of dollars per year into his wardrobe alone, apparently, or so he claims. He gave an interview once, I think it was on Mike Douglas, where he said something to that effect. For whatever reason, he decided in 1974 to marry model actress Kathy Silva, who, he'd been dating on and off for the past few years, and he actually did have a kid recently with little Sylvester Jr. The two got married, though, in this gaudy-as-hell ceremony at Madison Square Garden in June of that year, which probably cost Sly a very pretty penny. Meanwhile, amid this more romantic, extravagant period in his life, Sly wanted to go bigger and bolder with the next Family Stone album, hiring a dedicated violin player in Sid Page.
The band's new album, Small Talk, came out in July of 1974. So how was it? Well, this album unfortunately starts with weird vibes. The title track leads tightly with this, it leads things off with this tight funk through with some smooth vocals by Sly, but as the crying baby noises in the background will constantly remind you, this is obviously a song about Sly's son. It'd be a pretty cool track without the babies crying, but as it is, it's just kind of a sour introduction, you know. Excuse me. Baby Cries could probably be incorporated well onto a funk or a soul album. You know, Stevie Wonder did it pretty well with Isn't She Lovely, I think, but I don't know, it just doesn't fit with this sort of song. Fortunately though, after this track, the album does get a bit more interesting from there, starting with Say You Will. As I mentioned, this is the first Sly and the Family Stone album to utilize strings in addition to horns. Well, I mean, technically you had strings on Hot Fun in the Summertime, but I think that was a one-off sort of thing. But Sid Page, the hired violinist, he makes his presence felt as early as Say You Will. He adds this more folksy sort of dimension to some already clean funk music. I wouldn't go as far as to say the band were embracing disco, but this definitely feels like a precursor to that sort of full ensemble, like strings and horns in addition to band's music. Mother Beautiful is also this sweet ballad, if a little short and not as rhythmically funky as you would like from Sly. Time for Living and Can't Strain My Brain more than make up for that shortage of funk, though. They mix this steady, quasi-swung funk beat with some cool string parts interspersed with lovely background harmonies. In all, the impression you get from this first side is Sly who's, a bit more optimistic, perhaps a bit more mature now that he's had a kid and a wife. Now that he was, I think he was done being, either the optimist or the pessimist. I think he just wanted to appreciate the finer things in life, like his budding family. Then you get hit out of nowhere with Loose Booty on the second side, and it's a bit of a tonal mood whiplash, admittedly, but that song is exactly as rambunctious and funky as you would expect. It features the most prominent horn section and vocals from the other members of the band, on top of a perfect funk beat and that chant, Bendigo! Oh my god. If you ask me, it's the final true classic Family Stone song, and the fact that it feels like the entire family are getting in on the fun here. For the most part, this album feels like Sly's show, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Riot was mostly Sly's show, and Fresh was a lot more Sly-centric too. He's always sort of been the principal songwriter of the band, but you do wish that the rest of the band hadn't been relegated to the background sometimes by this point, particularly on tracks like Mother Beautiful and Small Talk, as I've already mentioned. Side B is also generally kind of a more mixed bag. Holding On is a great mixture of brass and strings with some soulful backbeat and background vocals, but then you got Wishful Thinking, which is a fine slow ballad with great Sly vocals and backup, but it's kind of staid and slow for a Sly song. Better Thee Than Me is this sleek wall of funk with some fantastic bass and organ work, and oh my god, that solid drum work at the end. Livin' While I'm Living is a surprising throwback to the sort of sound you might hear on Dance to the Music or Life, but with some funkier bass work, but sadly less horn. And then the album ends on another string and slide-dominated ballad, This Is Love, which is, it's not really much of a song. And doesn't it really sound something more like something by like the Penguins or another doo-wop outfit than Sly and the Family Stone? And to make things worse, it ends on a fade-out. So, what to really make of this? Small Talk, it's another ambitious new sound change, a career of ambitious new sound changes for Sly and the Family Stone, but it doesn't quite stick the landing in the way that past milestones effortlessly seem to. The band's incorporation of more string elements works really well on some songs. Like I said, Time for Living is really good. And they've got that breakout loose booty. Like, holy crap, where did that come from? I don't know, though. In other places, though, it feels like the band strayed a bit far from the lively sounds that sort of defined most of their work until now, for average balladry and more annoying overdubs. At 37 minutes long, Small Talk, it's still a decent listen overall. I would recommend it, and it doesn't overstay its welcome, really, but it's far from the band's peak. I'm going to give it a B. It's this album right here. And actually, you might notice this album cover. It's Sly and his wife at the time and his baby. It's he was totally trying to present himself, as a married man, a guy who's on this new stage in his life. But as we'll see, unfortunately, that didn't quite go as planned. Small Talk, you see, it was a moderate success. It went gold, and Time for Living was a top 40 hit, but, at this point, the general public was just kind of fed up with the band and their antics, Their live reputation was still like rock bottom. It was negative, since Sly and the others were frequently intoxicated or absent at shows, and they faced dwindling crowds. Eventually, this culminated in a January 1975 gig at Radio City Music Hall, the famous venue at New York, which was only an eighth filled. For context, Radio City Music Hall seats 6,015 people. They were a gold-selling band, only playing to about 750 people. Let that sink in. The band were in such dire financial straits, needless to say, that they actually had to scrape together the money for the trip home after that gig. After that, the band members just sort of mutually agreed to part ways. They were like, yeah, let's just burn this thing and not speak of it for a bit. The family Stone was dead. Sly was also suffering at this time. His marriage, unsurprisingly, collapsed at the end of 1974, and he was still hooked on drugs, and now he used to continue recording for Epic on his own. He was still under contract to produce music for them. Embattled, he returned to his situation for Riot. He recorded an album mostly in his home studio, and he brought in session musicians and former Family Stone members, actually, for overdubs. He even used some unused takes that had been recorded before the band's breakup, I think. The resulting solo effort, High on You, came out in November of 1975, only 10 months after the Family Stone's breakup, so it was a pretty quick turnaround, all things considered. This is the album right here. Honestly, Sly's first technical solo outing shows him in a far more energized position than Small Talk. The opener, I Get High on You, is rife with sexy beats, organ work, and even some funky early synthesizer, and Little Sister provides some great backing vocals on it, Has anyone ever sampled this in a rap song? I would love to hear that, man. Crossword Puzzle, and That's Loving You. Once again, they bring back the strings, but here they're incorporated in a much more stingy fashion similar to the horns. Again, Sly's very much precursing disco here, and it sounds slick as hell. Who Do You Love is even funkier and slicker. For as manufactured as this music was in the studio with Sly's various overdubs and use of studio musicians, it really does pop in a way that, Riot didn't before. Riot was a very isolated record. This is a very lively and energetic one. He really did know just how to produce a clean funk album by this point. The first side closes off this stellar intro with a funky instrumental. It's called Green-Eyed Monster Girl, and it's got some stellar organ work over top yet another funky groove, but you get the impression Sly was meaning to make a song out of it, but just didn't know how to, so he threw it on there as a jam. I don't know. That's just what I get at that. Side B is also generally very good. Organize is pure Family Stone, incorporating background vocals from Freddie, great bass playing from Rusty Allen, and another stellar Martini Robinson horn sectional, actually. Lilo Lai feels closer to something like Everyday People, though I admit its groove isn't as good. My World is a beautiful soft ballad with, in a first in Sly history, a muted trumpet part from Cynthia Robinson, which works really well in the context of the song, actually. So Good to Me is another kind of straightforward ballad with loud choruses that sounds like classic Sly, I think. I mean, it's pretty good, but at this point I do wish the album would pick up again with another funk slapper. Thankfully, the closing track, 3, doesn't disappoint, providing 4 minutes of wah-wah-driven funk boogie. A bit more of a mixed listen, but, side B goes by fast, so you don't really much feel disappointed in the end. In all, though, High on You is actually a really damn good funk album from 1975. It seems liberated from the shackles of the flower power nature of the previous Family Stone. Sly, he decided to lean right back in the black musical vernacular of the day and produce his own enlivened take on it. Honestly, it's not Sly's best work, obviously speaking. You can't recreate Stand or Riot. But it stands right alongside some of the contemporary funk we were seeing at this time, like, George Clinton's revived Parliament, Kool and the Gang, the Ohio Players, even like Stevie Wonder to a degree. This was a pleasant surprise for me. I am gladly going to give this album an A. Sadly for Sly, though, the album was only a moderate success. It found success on the American R&B charts, but not much further beyond that. Dismayed by this new result, I suppose Sly got the idea to revive the Family Stone idea with this new backing band. In an attempt to continue to bank off the name, he hired a bunch of new session musicians, including this apparently a pretty underground. She's won a bunch of Grammys in the past. Lady Bianca. I don't know. I looked around on her Wikipedia page, and she played with a bunch of other artists, including Frank Zappa. I've never heard of her before, but that's a neat little trivia. But he also played with past friends too, including like Little Sister. They were back for backing vocals, and Cynthia Robinson. Though, actually, they might have been more than friends at one point, considering Robinson actually had Sly's second kid around this time. But I digress. This new band recorded and released a new album in 1976, titled fittingly, Heard You Missed Me, Well, I'm Back. And this is the cover here. Sly sort of a one-man band, I guess, an apt metaphor for the recording processes of these albums. What else? Oh yeah. So, question is here, is this new Family Stone actually worth a damn? Like this new group of musicians Sly's assembled together? Well, I mean, they do groove, but at the end of the day, I feel like this is just retread ground or playing it safe. What Was I Thinking in My Head and Blessing in Disguise are good, but they sound like stuff that any other funk band would be making at this time, which, it's less like something distinctly Family Stone. It's very Gamble and Huff, which isn't bad. I love me some Philly soul. Like I said, I think I've said I'm a Southeast Pennsylvania cat in the past, but it's just not Sly Stone, honestly. Nothing Less Than Happiness. It's got this neat balladry duet going on, but it reminds me a bit of the weaker moments in Small Talk. Also, a few songs sort of sound discordant in their songwriting. The opening title track slaps, but it's got this very weird vocal melody to it. You see a lot more of Sly as Sly on side B, revisiting topical ground that he'd not taken on in ages, and it's there's My Mother is a Hippie, which retreads some of the silly ground Life touched upon, and Well, I mean, the instrumentation makes it a bit better, but this still isn't a song I would revisit, really. Songs like Let's Be Together and Family Again are cute revisits of the classic Family Stone sound, complete with traded vocals and more straight-ahead beats with additional elements, including conga drums. Everything You, The Thing, and The Thing, they're more funk in the vein than the first side, and the first is kind of forgettable. But The Thing is actually also kind of a slapper. Something also going against this album, unfortunately, is its runtime. It's the shortest Sly album to date at only 28 minutes in length. In fact, that's going to actually be a recurring theme coming up for the next two albums, which are also pretty damn short. Some might see this as a positive, getting a bite-sized taste of pure funk from Sly, but, well, that's not what this is. It sounds like multiple different R&B, soul, and funk bands in different parts, and while there are some great funk tunes here and there just aren't enough to really establish this album as anything more than a tepid attempt at a comeback. If Sly had honed the band's newer funk sound a little more and maybe made a few more pop-in tracks, this might be up to par with something like High on You. As it is, though, well, it doesn't really leave much of an impression. Heard You Miss Me, I'm Back, I'm Back, could have easily been so much more, but it's more like funk junk food in the end. It's no wonder that this album and its singles did even worse than High on You's. It hints at a Family Stone which could have been a lot more, but it just wasn't. Not without the classical septet. Not with Sly's mind so outed by drug use. I am giving it a C. So yeah, nobody was really excited for this reincarnated Sly, and Heard You Miss Me, like I said, bombed harder than High on You. Epic dropped him like that, and to kind of pour salt into the wound, they released an album of Sly and the Family Stone disco remixes after the fact called 10 Years Too Soon. It's kind of insulting, the label doesn't want your new shit, but they'll gladly release your old stuff just hopped up on, the latest trend. But anyways, in the interim, Sly would slink into the shadows for the next few years, only to reemerge in 1979 with a record deal with Warner Bros. Records. His first effort under that imprint, Back on the Right Track, came out in that same year. That is to say, this album here, the one where he's looking very dapper on the front. He's a very dapper boy there. Like the past few albums, Back on the Right Track, he's got some help here from his old bandmates like Freddie Stone, Rose Stone, Pat Rizzo, classic sort of Sly Stone solo album. They're where the members are, I guess they've warmed up to being legacy-wise this time. Well, firstly, kinda, but for an even shorter time than the last time he was around. This album is only 26 minutes long, and sadly, it doesn't really give us much beyond our standard Sly fare. Remember Who You Are is this very fresh-sounding groove which verges on disco in its beat, and honestly, that's something I can compliment throughout the entire album once again. The grooves are very competently made. The studio musicians that were hired to play on this album sound great, as do the returning cameos from old Family Stone members. This is evident on tracks like the title track and The Same Thing, the former of which has Rose Stone calling back an old memory from Music Lover. It's honestly so nice to hear her singing with her brother again. But that said, her brother, Sly delivers a decent performance here, but that's all it really feels like. His vocals feel uninspired in a lot of areas. He doesn't really shriek or squeal a lot like he used to, and the songwriting especially isn't really up to snuff. He sounds on autopilot for most of Side A, and Side B is much better. Shine It On is a very repetitive in a boring way, and sadly it's the longest song on the album. Not even a callback to Sing a Simple Song by Rose at the end can save it. Who's to Say is a bit more of a banger, with Sly playing the well off some scatting background vocals and disco-paced beat that foreshadows George Benson's Big Movie Night almost. The final track, Sheer Energy, is probably the least energetic track on the album. What is it with Sly and ending his album so unenergetically? It's seriously, it acts as more of a throwback to the country bluesish slide of Sly and the Family Stone, complete with a Sly squawking away on harmonica again to a funky beat, background vocalists, and well, that's all it is. It's just an instrumental. And I mean, not to take away from his multi-instrumental talent at all, especially like playing on harmonica. The harmonica is deceptively difficult to master. But come on, Sly, why don't you close your big comeback with this? And that's all I can really say about Back on the Right Track. I mean, what else can you really say for an album that doesn't even get a chance to get off the ground? Like, it has great potential in its groove and its beats, but it's just squandered by an uninspired frontman and a lack of song ideas. There are a few decent cuts on here, don't get me wrong. Like, The Same Thing and Who's to Say are genuinely good, but otherwise, if Sly was earnestly attempting a comeback here, he really failed to bring his A game in spite of the Family Stone support. This is the first album that I am going to relegate to D tier. So, again, needless to say, Sly Stone's comeback wasn't so successful to the general public. He did have one important friend and advocate, however, through fellow funk pioneer George Clinton. At multiple points in the late 1970s and 1980 and early 80s, Sly Stone made multiple live appearances with Parliament Funkadelic, and he even collaborated with Clinton on the Funkadelic album, The Electric Spanking of War Babies, for the track Funk Gets Stronger, Killer Millimeter Longer version. Clinton was planning on working with Stone again for a collaborative album in 1982, and the two actually did make multiple recordings for it until George Clinton got embroiled in his own legal troubles with Parliament Funkadelic, and more about that on some other episode of Rezi Reviews, hint hint. And Warner Bros. Records and Sly Stone dropped off the face of the earth for a few months. Producer Stuart Levine was left to assemble an album out of these fragments left behind. The result was this album right here, Ain't But the One Way, and it came out that same year, 1982, so, oh boy, how did it turn out? Well, immediately it's obvious that this album is sleeker than what's come before. 80s production is in full swing here, minus the gated snare, fortunately. There's plenty of reverb, there's more of a post-disco sound to the beats. It's kind of like a lesser-sounding Jackson's album, almost. I think for where Sly was in the 1980s, this works really well for him. I mean, most R&B artists at this time were verging on post-disco after, disco's collapse. But at the same time, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Opener Lovinu, it's a decent jam. Sly might still be a bit more underwhelming for the most part vocally here, but he does get in some really good organ jamming backed by a straight-ahead four-on-the-floor rhythm section. One Way, which is where the title comes from, is more of the same, proceeding at a similar tempo with a similar clean post-disco beat. At this point you kind of wanted them to switch things up a little bit, and thankfully the album does switch pace with Ha Ha He He, a song that was apparently written by Pat Rizzo for Small Talk, but it sounds clean as hell here, with the guitar and vocal harmonies, and that horn part, oh my god, it's probably the highlight of this album, and You know, it's very city pop sounding. If you love city pop, take a listen to this song. It's really groovy. I love it. Unfortunately, the next two tracks, Hoboken and Who in the Funk Do You Think You Are kind of bland and corny both musically and lyrically. And this sequence kind of reaches an apex with a cover of The Kinks' You Really Got Me, that's kind of neat, if, well, a little anemic. And I know this is apples and oranges to make this comparison here, but, you know, compare this with the scorcher of a cover that Van Halen did in 1978, just 3 years prior. 4 years prior, my bad. Sly, he had the opportunity to go like full screech vocally and ham it on the organ, you know, like he does on I Want to Take You Higher or something like that, with a harder hitting band too, but well, this cover is just kind of there, and it's alright, it's a neat take on the song, but it doesn't really give me a reason to come back and listen to it again. Unique to this album, there's actually a Say-like track here, almost poetry-like, called Sylvester, which sounds like Sly improvising some sort of song, maybe a bit about himself over an organ. It's neat, and it's maybe a little emotional, but a little filler too. I think it's trying to be what Coldplay's song was to the album of the same name, 18 years later, or however much long it was later, 2000. A brief little beautiful lull before the rest of the album, but it's just, Sylvester is just kind of there on this one. And again, this album was not 100% assembled by Sly Stone. For all we know, this could have just been random studio bullshittery he was up to that he never intended for release. But thankfully, the album does pick up a bit towards the end. We Can Do It is a funky, almost bluesy affair reminiscent of something off of High on You, which I really enjoy, you know. Hi Y'all is the third and final song in what I would like to informally call here the High trilogy. I mean, first you had Higher, then I Want to Take You Higher, and now this, Hi Y'all, you know, literally H-I-G-H, y'all, and it's groovy as hell. Sly sings in a smooth style over cut-time drums and bongo beats in the verses before the band transitions into this gospel-like chant for the chorus sections. And in the background, there are these weird synth-like sounds in the background, which you know the Family Stone totally would have done if they had access to that sort of sampling technology in 1969. So, what to make of the final Sly and the Family Stone commercial effort? Yeah, this was the final album to be released under the Sly and the Family Stone name. Well, for an assembly job, it is not as bad as it could have been. It is actually really good, in those circumstances. Is it still a good album, though? Well, I would say so, yes. It's fine. It stays around just as long as it needs to at 34 minutes in length, and maybe if the recording process wasn't interrupted by label bullshittery, maybe Sly could have polished this up further for a truly great Sly album of the 80s. Well, I mean, there was no saving cuts like Hoboken and Who in the Funk, but you know what I mean. Where are the drum machines, by the way? It is the early 80s after all. They were now starting to be musical lingua franca, like you had the Human League and Phil Collins experimenting with them, and Sly was the pioneer of all that stuff. This album could have started another creative, rejuvenative phase in his career, but instead it just sort of tanked, and this was one of his final commercial releases. I'm going to give this album a B. Oh wait, no, not this one. I would say, Ain't But the One Way. It's not a dark horse classic or anything like that, but it is underrated. Do check it out at some point. Like I said, though, nobody cared about it, and it failed to chart. Sly would continue making music for the rest of the 1980s, but in a far, far more reduced capacity, a more collaborative capacity, if you will. He showed up with other R&B bands live, and he recorded with them. He even appeared in, like, I think, a music video or two. But honestly, he was far more infamous around this time for his legal troubles. Like, he was arrested in 1983 for coke possession, or there was this 1995 dispute with an ex-landlord where he and his son were arrested for, or accused of trashing a property. The family Stone were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, but after that event, Sly, he wasn't seen in public again until 2006. In spite of the fact that he was still, like, you know, recording and making home demos at this time, which have, I think, leaked online, like the form of bootlegs, but I don't know. I've never listened to them. I've never bothered listening. He would eventually reemerge. In 2006, it was like the Grammys, I think, did this special tribute to Sly and the Family Stone, and he made like a surprise short cameo appearance, like on a performance of "I Want to Take You Higher." And actually, at the same time, his bandmates, a lot of them, I think, like Greg Errico, definitely the horn section, maybe Larry Graham, but or Rusty Allen, maybe Andy Newmark, but a bunch of old Sly and the Family Stone members were touring, I think, under the moniker of a new Family Stone, or, you know, Family Stone or something like that. And Sly did join them similarly, you know, in a few cameo appearances for a few dates. But, you know, actually, I should mention, they were doing all this without Freddie Stone. Freddie, in the interim, had actually become an evangelical preacher. Just a little fun fact trivia there. But, you know, while this was going on, in classic Sly fashion, he would soon start, you know, sometimes leave in the middle of shows to the audience's dismay. You know, rumors would eventually emerge that he was now living homeless in a van in Los Angeles because he'd been cut off from his royalty payments, but not before more news in 2009 that Sly was suddenly signed to Los Angeles-based Cleopatra Records and making a new album. What? You know, Sly has been referred to in the past as the J.D. Salinger of funk, you know, given how much of a recluse he's been historically. The dude is just so enigmatic with his creation of music, but given his music business troubles in the past, you know, pressures from the record label to, you know, make things commercial, get things in on time, you know, troubles in the past with Warner Bros. And, you know, George Clinton, it makes sense that he wouldn't bother, you know, just not putting out any new music for a while. Anyways, the new album, I'm Back, Family and Friends, which is the last one you see here, came out in 2011, credited to Sly Stone solo again, you know, for the first time since High on You. So if you're keeping track, this is the third time now that Sly has claimed to the public in the title of his album, you know, I'm Back, that, well, he's back, that he's making a comeback with his music, and shit, you know, after his disappearance from the public eye for like the last 16 or so years, and like odd appearances 2 years after that, you know, you want to believe him. Yeah, so what does he provide for us? Well, I'm gonna rip the band off. I'm gonna rip the Band-Aid off right now. There are shitty remakes of Family Stone classics and brand new tracks. Sly sounds like he still sounds in decent vocal shape, sure, but oh my god, this production, the production is just shit, man. I hate this production. Like, listening to Dance to the Music and comparing it with the original, the horns and drums sound flat as hell. The absence of the non-Sly members is readily apparent, and sometimes the vocals just sound murky as hell. Who the hell produced this? Apparently, some dude named Chris Lice is credited as producer, according to AllMusic. His only other credits to his name are a George Lynch solo album, and some live and compilation albums. Oof, Sly really got screwed hard here. But also, why the hell did Sly think it good to remake all his past glories instead of trying to make something genuinely new? I don't get that, you know? As the title implies, there are actually a bunch of guest stars on this album. You know, the second part, family and friends. You've got names like Ray Manzarek of The Doors, Ann Wilson of Heart, Bootsy Collins, you know, famous funk bassist Jeff Beck, Johnny Winter, and, well, they contribute little to these songs that the original members of the band didn't already contribute, but with more young enthusiasm and vigor. Family Affair would be a pretty decent remake, and I mean, hell, the original song had shit production too, and Sly's deeper age vocals really worked well there. It really worked well here. But then there's this annoying, ain't nothing but a family affair refrain that goes on, and there's all these random scattered singing from the female vocalists, and it's just, it's not good addition. Then there's Bootsy Collins. He injects his classic commentary sort of singing into Hot Fun in the Summertime, which is corny as hell, but I don't know, it's goofy. I love you, Bootsy, but it also doesn't help that a good chunk of this album's runtime is filled with remixes, alternate mixes. There's an extended mix of Dance to the Music, the remake of Dance to the Music, in the middle of the album, which just tacks on a segment of Music Lover at the end, which and then there's a club mix, which is just, oh Jesus, who is this for? A club mix of Dance to the Music, I should say. This just screams of how do you do, fellow kids, and that's not even getting into the dubstep remix of Family Affair? Oh God, this just screams 2011. Was this Sly's idea? Was this Chris Light's idea? Whose fucking idea was this? I mean, not to be like, haha, dubstep bad or anything, you know, I love me my wubs sometimes, but Family Affair is probably the Sly hit the least deserving of a loud, in-your-face dubstep remix. The remixes are rounded out by the Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again Electro Club remix. As far as remixes go, it's not awful, but again, it just sounds so dissonant. I mean, man. Then there are the new tracks, which, I mean, it's... Okay, so let's take them a look off. Plain Jane is a funky romp with a raunchy groove and some talk box effects. It sounds very G-funk, like, I don't know, it sounds kind of like Sly responding to hip-hop a bit, like, but like 20 years too late, almost. I like it just alright in that corny way. His Eye is on the Sparrow is a neat, soulful remake of what's apparently a gospel traditional. Sly's got an appropriately soulful voice here, and his organ tone is fantastic. And then you got Get Away, which is a good, if not too memorable, revisit of the textures from Fresh, even using that old school sounding drum machine noise for the first time in ages. You can tell that there's a spark of creativity in Sly yet, but unfortunately on this album it really failed to kindle into a flame. Overall, what happened, man? I mean, Sly, he still has vocal and instrumental talent, no doubt, but this is just a very tired, uninspired effort outside of maybe a few fleeting moments here and there. Maybe listen to the originals on this album once, out of curiosity, but otherwise there's nothing on this album worth your time, which is a shame. Because you'd think that the Sly Stone album with a bunch of cool guest musician contributors might be something promising. I mean, hell, that's pretty much what High on You was back in 1975, you know, a Sly Stone solo album with guest appearances by his former bandmates, and it was great. It's just unfortunate that this is probably the last Sly Stone music that we're ever going to get. D. It is deserving of a D. Ah, man. And that takes us to the end, because, yeah, like I said, Sly hasn't recorded a thing since then. He has been seen around. He has still been in, like, legal issues with, like, trying to secure his old royalty payments. But, you know, otherwise he's just been sort of, you know, sticking to the side. Maybe showing up, performing live every now and then, you know, hanging out with old bandmates, but otherwise he's, you know, I don't know. He's, like I said, J.D. Salinger of funk. He's not really that active. The rest of the Family Stone, you know, the past members have, like I've said, continued to tour, though. Unfortunately, Cynthia Robinson passed away in 2015 from, I don't know if it was cancer or what have you, but her memory will still live on. Like, she was an incredible trumpet player. She was an incredible hype woman. And just, you know, that horn section in Sly and the Family Stone practically laid the building blocks of modern funk. So, hats off to Sly and the Family Stone. It's such a damn good soul band, such a damn good funk band, such a damn good psychedelic band. They were a lot of things in one. They were multiracial, they were multi-genre, and they were, above all, just, you know, they were just great. They were just a great group of musicians in their prime. But that, ladies and gentlemen, oh my gosh, that is going to take us to the end of our stream for today. Thank you so much, everybody who joined me. This is a really fun discography review to do, because I've never listened to the later Sly Stone albums, and I mean, most of them aren't necessarily the best, but there are some hidden nuggets. Like I said, High On You is a delightfully underrated funk album, so definitely go check that out. But yeah, you know, if you liked this video, please do be sure to give this video a like. Maybe leave a comment below talking about, you know, what you thought of my opinions. Maybe list your own ranking of the Sly and the Family Stone albums. I'm going to go back later, or soon after this, the VOD is posted, and I'm going to edit in timestamps, so you can, you know, go back any way you like and watch this video. Or for the people who are just coming in, or for the people who are watching on archives, to save you the hassle of watching the entire stream without any timestamps. So I'm going to do that. So yeah, like, subscribe, leave a comment, ring that notification bell. You know, I'm always posting news on Twitter too. Follow me on Twitter there. My next content, what am I going to do next? I believe on Friday, yeah, we've got more Doom 2. I'm really looking forward to that, though. I might be getting into a bit of pain here because, you know, we're essentially where we are on the Rhine. In the run, we're going in blind for the rest of the game, and we are on Ultraviolence, fighting a bunch of the super scary Doom 2 enemies. It might be a bad time, but we'll see. And then after that, you know, stay tuned, actually. Oh, I forgot to mention, I have been working on another clip, and hopefully, if all goes right, I should be able to put it up tomorrow. So look forward to that, as well as maybe a hidden guerrilla stream over the weekend. So keep that in mind. Yeah. But anyways, thank you guys so much for coming to my stream. This has been Rezi Reviews once again with some Rezi Reviews. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.